There are growing fears that the new escalation between Russia and Ukraine could trigger a major crisis. Russia seized 3 small Ukrainian ships during a shootout over the weekend. Forces also detained around 24 Ukrainian sailors. Now Ukraine has imposed martial law.
This is the first sign of armed conflict between the countries since 2014, when Russian troops annexed Crimea. The U.S., NATO, and the United Nations have called for peace. So for more on this, we want to bring in CBSN contributor Alex Kliment. He writes for Signal, a newsletter produced by GZero Media. All right, Alex, we said that this is the first sign of sort of armed conflict. Sometimes on this side of the pond, we, lose track of what's going on somewhere else, and we cover our own news. But it appears as if after 2014, the whole Crimea thing simmered down and nothing was going on. Have tensions been rising all along, and now we get to this?
So most of the time since 2014, the conflict has been over territory in eastern Ukraine. But this is about who controls the waters around Crimea. One of the problems that Russia immediately had when they annexed the Crimean Peninsula in 2014 is that Crimea is not connected to Russia. So what they did was they built a bridge, which was finished earlier this year. It just so happens that that bridge goes across a shipping lane that is absolutely critical for Ukrainian exporters of steel and grain, which is a huge part of the Ukrainian economy. So since the bridge was finished earlier this year, there's been tension over who controls the waters around it. The Russian authorities have been detaining Ukrainian and international ships who want to go through that waterway, which has had 2 effects. One is that it's hurt the Ukrainian economy. And 2 is that it's led to tensions and clashes like the one that we saw over the weekend. The one that we saw over the weekend was the biggest escalation by far because Russia fired on a Ukrainian ship that they said hadn't listened to their orders and so on. But that's really the background of this story.
Okay.
So the Kremlin is saying that this declaration of martial law is a political ploy. It does beg the question, why declare martial law for this and not back in 2014?
Right. So what Ukraine has done in response to this is to declare martial law in a number of parts of Ukraine that border Russia or Russian forces. And the question has been raised, as you say, look, even during the height of the conflict in 2014, 2015, martial law was not declared. There's certainly no chance that Ukraine is going to meaningfully fight back against Russia. They're totally overwhelmed. So one thing that critics have said is perhaps this is a play having to do with domestic Ukrainian politics. President Poroshenko faces a re-election in March, which he is almost sure to lose. His approval rating is absolutely abysmal right now. And one thing that imposing martial law does is it creates the possibility of postponing those elections. So a lot of the focus has been less on what martial law means in terms of the conflict with Russia and more about what the Ukrainian president, who, as I said, is deeply unpopular right now, may be doing with this situation to try to protect himself politically.
So the UN Security Council held this emergency meeting yesterday, and pretty much it was unanimous. United States and all the other countries condemned Russia for what they were doing, called the action illegal. The president was asked. He was sort of less firm in his response, at least less firm than Nikki Haley. But, what do you anticipate the international reaction will be? What do you think the best reaction is?
Well, I anticipate that not much is going to change.
Right.
Look, in the UN, Russia can veto anything that happens, right? But I think more to the point, the lesson that we learned in 2014 when the conflict first started was that Ukraine simply matters so much more to Russia, strategically, politically, economically, culturally, so much more to Russia than it does to Europe or to the U.S., that neither the U.S. or Europe are going to put any real skin in the game to punish Russia for doing this. The interesting thing, in 2014, Russia made this bold play by annexing Crimea, and sanctions were imposed, which have had some effect on the Russian economy. Now what Russia's doing is basically saying, we control this waterway also. And what the international response will be, we'll have to see. My guess is that it will not be much because of what I just said.
Alex, I want to get to hard numbers, but because we rarely cover something as in-depth with somebody as talented as you, ask you about reports in the AP and other news organizations about certain far-right-wing factions within the Ukrainian government that have embraced far-right groups in that country. Does that play into any of this at all?
Well, look, there is certainly a nationalist fringe in Ukraine that has dallied with far-right and neo-Nazi groups. That is true. The bigger issue with more mainstream nationalists in Ukraine, though, is that the conflict over eastern Ukraine is one in which Russia wants the Ukrainian government to change its constitution to give vast autonomy to these regions of eastern Ukraine. Nationalists within the Ukrainian government and parliament say nothing doing. So there's a big deadlock there between what the Russians are asking for and what's politically possible within a democracy like Ukraine.
So we're going to go to hard numbers. Vlad brought up this, far-right movement. So let's go with 56,200.
So far this year, 56,200 migrants have come ashore. Migrants from North Africa have come ashore in Spain, which dwarfs the numbers in any other southern European country. Most of the focus with migrant arrivals over the past several years has, of course, been in Greece or in Italy or in France. Now we're starting to see it in Spain, and not surprisingly, that has given fertile ground for a new far-right party called Vox, which is making claims similar to other far-right parties elsewhere in Europe about turning migrants away. They'll face their first big electoral test in local elections in Andalusia this weekend.
Really interesting stuff, Alex. As always, you can find these hard numbers on the Signal website. Really fascinating one about the decline of suicides globally in this country. So check that out by subscribing to the Signal newsletter. Sign up for it at GZeroMedia.com.